Good morning and welcome to the second day of the 13th International Congress of Educating Cities and to this meeting room in the Congress Palace where we'll be working over the next few days. Yesterday, the opening day was replete with content and work which went excellently. It was a very successful day. We had workshops of experiences, speakers' corners, and roundtables that allowed us to learn about all of your work. We hope that today is also a success, and we'd like to remind you, please, to be very punctual at every activity because we have a very full agenda and very interesting for all of you. And so without further ado, we're going to get started today with the first session, which is the Creativity and Inclusion Dialogue. It'll be chaired by Dr. Francesc Torralba, who's a member of the Scientific Committee of the Congress. He has a doctorate in philosophy from the University of Barcelona and a doctorate in theology from the Faculty of Theology of Catalonia. Welcome, and over to you.
Intentaré presentar molt bé.
I'm going to give a very brief introduction to this roundtable. We have three experts who are perfect for what we want to think about today, which is creativity and inclusion. How we can enable inclusion in the most vulnerable swathes of society, and how we can set up strategies to develop creativity among all citizens to create a fully educating city. So we have three people here. You have their CVs on the website, so I'll just introduce them briefly. They're experts in this area for various reasons, and I'll just introduce them briefly, and then I'm going to put a question to them, which they'll answer briefly, and then we'll have another question. And at the end of this question and answer session, we shall conclude with Madame Gutemora, who's here from Portugal, on my right. She's a creative director, a strategist, a creative thinker, among many other things. And she's also director of experiment and design in Lisbon. We're very glad to have her here with us. On the far left, Josep Maria Coll, who's a lecturer at the Maastricht School of Management. He travels around the world. He's director, founder of the Access Office in Korea. He speaks Catalan, obviously, but he often speaks English. And then we have Rafael Pérez Colón, who's the world director of Microsoft Corporation. And he has a long track record in ITCs and new models of incorporative citizenship. So three different profiles from three different parts of the world are here with us this morning. The first question is as follows. And firstly, I'll ask the question to Josep Maria Coll. Sociologists say that we live in a society which is a network, a digital society, a networking society, as we've seen. And the question I'd like to put to the table is, how can we promote social inclusion processes using information and communications technologies that we all use and that we use to grow, have relations, consume, buy? How can we use these technologies to add to increase inclusion and spread it to all swathes of society and all towns around the world? So I'm firstly put this question to Josep Maria Coll. Thank you, Dr. Torralba, and good morning, everybody. I'd like to take two approaches to this question. The first is a question of accessibility. Although the digital society, the networking society, can open many doors, and door to equality also, there's a high entry cost, as it's known, for societies, and societies particularly with higher levels of development. So we need to distinguish access from use. There are international debates, for example, in the European Commission, on access to the network. It's not just about having the opportunity to access technology, though, but how it's used. So I think it's very important to have training in this knowledge on the one hand, and also how can we turn that knowledge into motivation so it has a return for society in welfare or economic growth. So depending on the country, it's interesting to look at the practices you see according to the rate of development. There's a viral phenomenon which is very much in vogue recently. In fact, there's this mass online courses, massive online open courses, they're known MOOCs. And this is an example of free access to education online. It's very democratic in its access. And one of the most well-known platforms is Coursera. And that's an initiative that came about in the US, but almost half of the users are in developing countries, and that's very interesting to note. We also have interesting social practice in countries, highly industrialized countries. An example is South Korea, which is one of the most connected countries in the world in terms of smartphone and internet users. And there's a pilot test in South Korea being launched at the moment, which is called Government 3.0. And the idea is, it came about from a person who committed suicide through risk of social and economic exclusion and living in abject poverty. And that person was entitled to receive benefits from the government. And so this gave rise to a very interesting debate in Korean society and politics. And they decided to launch this platform, which is a combination of offline activities to try and detect people at risk of exclusion who don't know that they could get government benefits. So their profiles were digitalized, and they set up training courses for these people so that they could be monitored online. So it's a combination of offline and online measures in public policies that is already yielding results. And I'd also just like to mention the Fab Labs, urban laboratories that are democratizing 3D imprinting. This is something that is really changing the productive industry phenomenon. And also sales of these products. There are already 30 countries that are connected online. So all of the new designs are open and can be shared with other citizens. So citizens have public spaces where they can go and they can become digital designers and crafts workers. And that's something that I think is really going to revolutionize the industrial fabric of society. And the last point I have, for developing countries where access to the internet is far more restricted, there are different models. For example, Grameenphone in Bangladesh in Dakar. It's part of the Grayman Bank, which is very well known. It's set up by Mohammed Yunus, aimed at poorer people. And in 1997, they created a company to democratize access to the internet with through an agreement with a Norwegian company and financing. Obviously, there's a need for startup injection of capital. They have to be patient because return on investment is very slow. But little by little, through these partnerships, public-private partnerships, be it NGOs, private foundations who work on social issues and education and who are very committed to this and who seek to provide education through new technologies. So all of these alliances can create strategies with value added, optimizing costs. And although, as I say, the yield is much more in the long term, it does come. Thank you very much. Rafael, you have the floor, sir. Thank you, Francesc, and good morning to you all. The topics we were talking about yesterday and linking to today give rise to many questions and queries, but I think it's interesting to think about why we can be talking about this today. We can talk about inclusion with a real potential for taking information, education, and knowledge to people all over the world at levels which we could never have done previously. In technology world, it's something that we've dreamed about, these future scenarios. And today, many of these things are already possible. I just have one word to describe the current situation in terms of the potential impact that we can have on people's lives using new technologies. And it's unimaginable is the word. What we can do is unimaginable. Just 10 years ago, there was a huge explosion of internet. We were very lucky to be pioneering in that. We saw a lot, but we really didn't forecast at all the impact it would have on people's lives. We've been surprised about what has happened over the course of the years. So unimaginable is the word that I have for the future also. Looking at 4 or 5 very clear trends today. The first is disruptive. It generates enormous potential on what we call cloud computing. Cloud computing has given us unlimited potential. And we're talking about here the capacity that previously just a few big corporations, research centers, big, powerful governments had. That is already within the reach of everybody through cloud computing. Capacity to store millions, billions, trillions quantities of information that we could never have imagined. And today, anybody can access that. So that's the first aspect of this new technological platform that has enabled the huge transformation we're seeing today, which has led to real inclusion and democratization for all people. And second is mobile technology. In most advanced societies, mobile technology is everywhere, but also in developing countries. And this is something that's fascinating. Some years ago, I worked in a remote neighborhood in the center of Brazil, about 15 years ago, where people basically traveled on horseback. They washed their clothes in the river, but they all had a mobile phone. That was 15 years ago. And when I saw that, I had an inkling about what mobile phones would give us. And today, with cuts in costs, new market models that have given us devices that are even more powerful than computers we had 20 years ago, we can all connect from anywhere in the world and access information. We can share it and participate in it. So first, cloud computing. Second, mobile phones that are connected. And my third point is social networking. That's another part of this huge transformation we're seeing that allow people to connect according to their interests wherever they are. And this is bringing about a huge change in governance, in decision-making and participation. We're talking about voting from social networks. And this is very active, it's very powerful, has a huge influence on decision-making. It's creating markets, it's overthrowing governments, generating new trends and directions, and all through social networks. The fourth trend has to do with the Internet of Things, the big data world, which allows us to interpret what's going on in cities, what's going on around us in real time. And that's something we've never been able to do before. So all of these aspects I've mentioned of new technologies have given us this really unimaginable potential for inclusion, participation, competitiveness, social development, and education and growth of our societies in the digital world. So I'll leave it there for now, and we'll come back to this in more detail later. Guten Morgen. Good morning, everybody. I'd love to speak Spanish, but I'm afraid I'm not totally fluent in it, so I'm going to switch to Portuguese. I know you have interpreting. So, for a coincidence, last week I was at a conference organized by IBM, not Microsoft, but IBM, on future challenges. And they were also talking about our control of digital technologies that could be used for the future. What Rafael says is totally true. Obviously, we all know that this is an extraordinary time in terms of skills that we acquire digitally. In social terms, we have this huge, enormous potential which will give us tools for the future that are very interesting. I think for me what's most important here is social inclusion. So in our cities and our society, they're very asymmetrical. There are huge asymmetries in terms of education, in economic terms, throughout Europe. Europe is a clear example of this, big asymmetries. So how do we promote social inclusion, which is key? We can't just let one part of society develop with these tools and leave everybody else behind. So how do we promote social inclusion using all of this digital universe? One of the great benefits of the digital world, almost contrary to what we did in previous centuries, is that what we designed previously was very rigid in terms of three-dimensional supports and very rigid materials, built-in houses, roads, all of this, very rigid. The digital universe is absolutely the opposite. It's very flexible. It's very fast for the first time, hugely flexible. And it's very easy to transform, so it can respond to new issues very quickly. So how do we get these new tools to everybody, knowing that the learning curve is not always fast? And there's also the economic issue. Not everybody has the purchasing power to access what we are seeing, what is available in new technologies. We know, and this is something new in the 21st century, there are almost guerrilla type proposals that are creating very accessible situations. Consumers can do much more. But we have to address these issues, and cities can play a very important role here, be it in policies, decision-making, policy makers. Those can be very important to set up systems that are available for people who live in cities. And they can also set up learning and structures that get closer to citizens. These are the issues that I think are fundamental. And if we can achieve all of this, progress will be much more symmetrical and fair. And another challenge I think is very important, and it's more related to where I work in design. How do we design these new objects that we use? Designers have a key role here, because we can design an object for a 20-year-old, say, and another thing is designing an object that also has to be used by a 5-year-old or a 60-year-old. So inclusive design is something we have to think about. Objects that can be used by everybody and include social and inclusion aspects also. So that has to be considered, and big corporations have to think about this. So designing objects that can be used by anybody and everybody. And I think that picks up and adds to what Raphael was talking about. Inclusion goes far more deeper, I think, than what we might realize. Thank you. Let's go on to the next question then that I'm going to put to all the speakers. In many big cities around the world, we see inequality and exclusion. There are socially and economically vulnerable groups who don't have a minimum means to use the huge talent they have. So the question is, what type of strategy or policy or ideas should we be coming up with so that these usually excluded or marginalized groups in big cities can also grow, develop, and explore their creative talent? If we don't do that, apart from the fact that it's an injustice, it's an enormous waste of talent in a city, just because we haven't made the right effort, developed the right strategies so that we can harness all of the creative talent that exists in these huge groups in massive cities where there are inequalities. Josep Maria Coll, put that question to you first.
Jo crec que primer hem de...
Hello. Well, I think we have to really clearly define the concept and what role cities have to incentive to add incentives. There were two key moments which allowed me to conceive this. In Asia, with what is known as a sort of meditation session in a Buddhist temple for 2 days, I saw that there they understand art as a path to liberation from suffering, but not physical suffering, but this sense of dissatisfaction, which often takes hold of us throughout life. And vulnerable groups, the deprived population, this population which leads us to talk about inclusiveness, are the ones who suffer most in this sense. And I liked this approach of using creative talent, i.e. the arts, as a path to liberation. And this leads to creativity, to a sense of creativity amongst these excluded groups, and indicates a path to inclusion, to inclusiveness. That was one point. The second point, which gave me insight, was a research project in Tanzania, in Dodoma, which is the administrative capital. It's in a rather barren part of the country where there's a lot of drought. It hardly ever rains. It's in the middle of the country. There are issues with water supply, and there's a lot of poverty in Dodoma. There were many NGOs, 72 in fact, working together with the government to include the excluded population in education, in health provision, entrepreneurship skills, and they had issues of communication with those who went there to attempt to share these skills and the local population. And art also allows to foster communication and creative talent. And they represented with sort of performing art skills the problems they faced, pressing daily issues: access to water, access to technology, problems they had when it came to asking for, a micro loan. They had no security. Land is worthless. They couldn't offer that up as security, and with a heavy emotional charge, or a burden. People didn't want to talk about these problems, and so these theatrical or theatre drama techniques were used to talk about, policies which were being developed. And this led me to ponder, these techniques could be applied in other areas, not just in developing countries where there is severe poverty, but in highly industrialized countries, highly developed countries, where there are pockets of poverty. There are techniques not just to express feelings, but to communicate with groups which maybe have different issues and different ways of expressing themselves. Rafael, thank you ever so much for such an interesting question. It is a fact that cities continue to grow. People are moving to cities. There's certain urban drift, and this raises a whole series of challenges concerning participation, inclusiveness, democratization, concerning access to information, creativity. Art is becoming increasingly a pressing debate. It's an unstoppable movement. Movement to urban drift is an unstoppable movement, let me say. New technologies, ITCs, allow a new ecosystem which allows us to do many things which before were impossible. I think it will open a whole arsenal of possibilities. So what are the strategies which will allow us to move forward in a quicker fashion to show that we can all seize these opportunities? Enterprises, and I am very proud of the work which we have done in Microsoft. We have perceived that the future of enterprises will go hand in hand with development of life opportunities, life chances for people. If citizens do not see benefits and do not note an improvement in their standard of living and in their life chances, we, technological companies, would cease to exist. So everything we do should have a positive knock-on effect on people's lives. And we must try and understand what these models are. In Microsoft, we understood that the growth of our business lay in emerging economies and all these new generations which are coming on stream into digital life. We're talking of mobile first, cloud first, the cloud technology, technological models, and digitalization via companies, universities, SMEs. And the key word from the strategic viewpoint and the key concept which we as a company have developed for our business model for cooperation and collaboration is a concept of alliances. In our case, the business model of our company is based on alliances with other technological companies wherever we carry out business. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of companies which make up an ecosystem which works with us in developing software solutions, in handing technological solutions to governments, to companies, to people, and alliances with sectors who are working with the social fabric, with NGOs, basically, non-for-profit companies. We have alliances everywhere where these NGOs use Microsoft software almost for free. They allow them to have the sort of state-of-the-art technology, and they can carry outreach to the most excluded and marginal and outlying populations. Education is another vital element. Unless people are empowered to use new digital technology, unless they have these necessary skills, either as entrepreneurs or as just, citizens, and if they are not enabled, we will not be successful, neither us as a company or society as a whole. That is why in the educational field, all our basic products available on the cloud are available for free for educational sectors, especially when it comes based in cloud technology. Now, the youth, that's key. Employability of young people, that's essential. We have partnerships with the UN, with development banks, with governments, with NGOs, working on youth employability issues. We have strengths and as a company in what we can contribute. We look at how we can work with youth at risk or in vulnerable sectors to ensure that they can become empowered, that they get the necessary skills to participate in digital technology. There are many examples of alliances with governments, international governments around the world. We're talking of groups, specific groups, gender groups, women who are isolated and need to obtain entrepreneurship skills in alliance with, say, bodies like Grameen Bank or other microcredit bodies in the world who allow women to, if you like, get get the first step on the ladder in terms of technology skills. And we're talking of people with disabilities who often will also remain in the margins. Local languages, essential. The fact that technological platforms be available in indigenous languages, in national languages, is essential. Our products are available in all languages which are spoken in Spain, which are official in Spain. So inclusion, how to ensure people have access is essential for the future of companies. In the case of Microsoft, we have clearly seized the concept. We feel, I think, fairly justly proud of our work, of our achievements. But the scenario has changed. The goalposts have changed, so to speak, in the last few years. And even the many things we learned and developed in the past decade, devising strategic alliances, are still applicable and relevant. Now we have a different scenario, say, which we find in cities like Barcelona. Barcelona has adopted a smart city strategy and is looking at issues like creativity, innovation, and how to make the city more attractive for creative people and people who wish to enjoy digital lifestyle. This does set up a series of new challenges, but we shall continue talking about that if we have time. If we have time, of course. Thank you. Good. Well, for me, it's a key issue: creativity, culture, and art. To allow development of society. Sorry, I shall continue in Portuguese. I believe that it is fundamental. It's fundamental when we think in educating cities. I think that it is one of the key sectors when we think of the purpose of a city as a platform for education, for a better society. What Josep was telling us, with two examples from outside Europe, just actually bore out my words, what we know, that from a human viewpoint, the component of creativity, of art, are fundamental and are essential. And we see that in a cross-cutting way in all societies. Now when it comes to Europe and comparing the European platform to the rest of the world, and looking at our cities, and I mean our cities in Europe, all our cities in Europe, well, I feel that the question of art and creativity make a big contribution, a huge contribution to establish bridges and of understanding with others. And that's one of the key issues. How can we create a global society which communicates in the way it does, in a very swift fashion? How we understand the others, to understand what the others are made of, the stuff they're made of. Art, culture, creativity have dimensions, possibilities of reaching out, which are absolutely essential. There's nothing with that strength, that power to transform and to bring us close to others, to our fellow human beings. And that has to do with culture and creativity. And all the examples we can mention and quote here, maybe it's cities with severe social issues, or outside cities where there are similar issues which have to be overcome. When we leverage creativity and art, solutions come much quicker. It's so important when it comes to using new technology. Investment in new technologies does lead to magnificent results, we have seen. And if we if you like, gave the same resource and paid the same attention to the immense opportunities of culture and art, we could move forward much quicker. Now we have invested a lot in hardware, but what about soft skills? And in that sense, creativity and art are vital. Any city which wishes to define itself as a city for education and culture must invest in these soft skills, creation of spaces, which are spaces which can be catalyzers of creative potential. And we don't have to study a lot about that, or we know how things function. A lot of the work has been done. How we can implement in practice creativity, culture, art and design on several fronts at the same time. There are pragmatic issues, mobility within a city, there are issues related to industrial fabric. Whenever we create a creative vector in any process, whatever it is, it's like a wand which provides solutions in a much quicker fashion. Another useful tool which can be merged with digital technological tools are cultural tools. This combination of technology and art, which is a very interesting combination, fusion, is cross-cutting. There's not that much difference in that sense between Brazil, Asia, Europe. So we can have the certainty that it is a key element of human beings. Any city or any group which uses this vector will have a head start in terms of attaining positive results. Thank you very much. Third question is to set up an issue challenge for many educational institutions. It's the following dilemma. On the one hand, we must include all groups, independently of their situation, their degree of vulnerability. We must include all. This is directly linked to the universal right to education and to the duty that governments have, governments which have signed the Charter, to include all people, to ensure that talents can grow and foster and blossom. Then there is also a competitive environment, which means that often we find it impossible to ensure universal inclusion and allowing high levels of excellence. Some will say, well, if we want to attain maximum levels of educational attainment and excellence in schools or in universities, inevitably we shall have to exclude those persons, those groups who have learning difficulties or have difficulties in allowing their talent to blossom or integrating into the academic environment, school, university. So that's a conundrum, isn't it? And I think the challenge, and I think we should look at it now. The challenge is how to guarantee universal inclusion, because all have a right to the levels of excellence in education, but how to also ensure that there isn't, if you like, a dumbing down, bringing down the levels of excellence. So otherwise we might get the false impression that only those who exclude or select in a rigorous fashion will be able to have excellence. But if we accept that, then we are legitimizing a certain level of exclusion. How to guarantee this link between inclusion and excellence? How can we, if you like, mix these two elements and not think of them as two mutually exclusive opposites, like water and oil? Like oil floats to the top and water remains at the bottom, separate. There's no merging, no fusion there. So that's it. How can we ensure that there is excellence on one side and no exclusion? Well, that's a $64 billion question, isn't it, says Maria Coll. Let us remember that about 200, scarcely 200 years ago, there's 0 point something of literacy, people who had access to education. Today, we are, well, the last figure I had was about 83%. Within the history of humanity, in the last 200 years, there have been immense movements forward in access to education. And we have moved forward a lot. Nonetheless, in this new digital era, we have a ubiquitous society where all ITCs are there to be used. It's like metaphor of the hammer. A hammer can be used to hammer in a nail, or to be used to hit someone on the head, if you like, to crack someone's skull. So there are many experiences we have talked about which bear this out. It's a double-edged sword, but technology, if technology is inaccessible or not difficult to or is out of reach for certain groups, can widen the gulf. So maximizing talent, maximizing excellence. Yes, there's a risk. If we discriminate, there'll be a few who will be highly qualified, but the gap will be increasingly a yawning gap. And this is a paradigm, isn't it? The model, the system, or the eco-educational system, I'm not talking about Biden schools, universities, but understanding this in a holistic sense, in the sense of the Charter, the ubiquitous educational city in the widest development. Well, its roots go back to the Industrial Revolution period, when people were educated as active educational, productive items or elements. And there is academic research in the literature that when our economic needs are met, we have greater, if you like, subjective happiness. A job is, a place of work is one way to express your creativity. But what we now know, and significant research has been carried out, and Daniel Kahneman, a sociologist, Nobel Prize in 2002, sort of dwelt on that. People who can develop their talent to the full with a high level of excellence, these individuals are happier. They have higher levels of well-being, personal well-being, and this has a positive, is like a virtuous circle. So the new paradigm, moving in that sense, it's bidirectional, it's two-way movement, if you like. To develop talent and excellence will only be able to be carried out when we design educational models, educational policies which attempt to bring the best out of everyone, to maximize talent. The vox populi of educational development in secondary school are the PISA reports, saying, how are we doing? Well, the two countries which normally are at the top are Finland, and we talked a lot about Finland, and South Korea, with two completely opposite types of models. In Finland, there's a model which fosters, in a personalized fashion, a creative talent. We personalize education based on the capacity of each individual. I think that's the future. In Korea, there's still, if you like, a model where it's like repetition, a culture of effort, completely different cultural setups, I agree, Finland and Korea. But if you look at the PISA report and we see that it concentrates on the development of cognitive logic in maths, say, and evaluates how and when we look at how countries function, the first indicator, first metric is GDP. But when we realize that we're still centered on this kind of ecosystem, it is very difficult to aspire to highest levels of excellence, which in an inclusive fashion. Thank you very much, Jose Maria. Inclusion and excellence. Yes, well, that is as I said, it's a $64 billion question. Well, when I started working in Microsoft about 17 years ago, I had been working in universities and in public administration, government. And in universities, we felt, okay, we know it all. We've got the answer to everything. And governments decided everything on behalf of people. And when I came to the private enterprise, I heard for the first time, oh, well, we don't know how to do that. It was a dramatic sea change. Sometimes I laughed. Well, what do you mean we don't understand? Hey, what do you mean? We have the answer. But with time, I became convinced that, in fact, indeed, we don't know much about what's going on. And we are at a moment when there are a lot more questions than answer. And to talk about total inclusion and at the same time reach levels of excellence, there remains a lot to be done. We must learn a lot more. There are many more questions to be raised, and we'll have to test and trial many, many different options. So if we look at this new platform of new technologies and this new digital fabric, which supports new society, let me highlight a couple of points here. Number one, let me look at all the aspects of development of digital skills right across society. And now we can have distance education, the MOOCs, online courses for free, and other modalities which we cannot really imagine, and which becoming on stream soon. People saying that Twitter will now move over into the video format. All this is quickly transforming the whole scenario at incredible speeds. Question of security. Now, that is a big challenge for society today, isn't it? Not just because of international terrorism, but it's not just that. We have big security issues. We must feel safe in a digital environment. That's another key issue. Mechanisms are there. The technologies are at hand. We must learn how to use them properly. The resources are there. We're carrying out a big effort to ensure that people can fully understand them, be familiar with them, know how to use internet, how to use web services in a safe and secure environment. This is another essential element. Furthermore, there's another point that comes up. Social ethics, if you like. Ethics of institutions, individual ethics. And this leads us to a situation, a current situation, where all the debate on ethics is again being updated because of this the whole bottom-up, grassroots upwards process, which is forcing people to rethink the way decisions are taken. We're talking of new models of governance. Because the conditions of new society are different. Today, people can participate, they must participate, they want to participate in governance processes, in decision-making process, and it can be done. It can be done. We have all the aspects of, for instance, how innovation, how creativity of persons can have a positive knock-on effect on all of us, because of this bottom-up approach. We're talking of social innovation. Well, what is social innovation? It's one of the most fascinating chapters of, if you like, of the narrative in the world. How people discuss their interests, fix their priorities, propose solutions. We can get multidisciplinary working teams, getting, if you like, the entrepreneur, a doctor, a professional, and saying, okay, have a conversation, which will lead to the issues which are of interest to people, and that comes from grassroots via creative processes, processes of cooperation, setting up of new alliances, and this at a global level is taking place thanks to social media. People can know, okay, I know where I can find people who have the same interests and share the same anxieties or expectations as I do. So, how shall I put it? To wind up this idea of excellence and inclusion, this paradigm of excellence and inclusion, I think much evolution will take place. We're never going to say, okay, we've got there, right? We've reached the target line. Because just when we think we've got there, suddenly the whole stage will change again. We'll always be running behind, if you like, the finishing line. But when we look backwards, we'll say, wow, we've learned a lot. We've got a long way. And the life of many, many human beings has been transformed. Thank you, Rafael. Okay. When Francisco sent me these questions, this was, if you like, the toughest one. It's an almost, at all levels, from a philosophical one, it was a more difficult one. It's the most difficult one. Well, we can, looking at this, the maximum level of social inclusion and maximum level of excellence, they almost seem opposites. And I don't, they shouldn't be. But it looks like they are. Often, and it's an aspirational question. We want the maximum social inclusion and maximum levels of excellence. It seems impossible to combine these two. It seems an impossible objective to attain. But I'm perhaps just thinking aloud, so to speak. The right to education is doubtless a universal right. All of us have a right to receive education, and all cities, social systems must, in some way or another, design a basic system to ensure that there is universal access to education. So that is a starter, which is a given, if you like. Everyone should accept that. And then there's another fascinating point. We're all different human beings. There's immense variety. We want to ensure, to provide educational inclusiveness, but we are all very different. There's no sort of one-size-fits-all, if you like. So the way countries are evaluated, or the way countries' educational systems are evaluated, is unfair, because what is the metrics cannot fully seize the whole value of an educational system, and they lead to biased readings, which are not right, are not fully accurate. So it's always very, very difficult to create a system which can evaluate all educational systems across the board, and it's very difficult to achieve this aspiration of including all and everyone in an educational system. But when it comes to this key issue, new technologies, and if we look at the moment we are living through, well, I believe that we individuals become far more proactive when it comes into educational issues. So if I am protected by, if you like, this right to basic education, well, if we look at systems with access to internet, access to digital tools, we find that is growing. So if I wanted, I could customize my education. I could customize it according to what I am and what my aspirations are. And that can be done to a greater extent than we are used to. So the whole range of possibilities which will allow us to reach a point where the educational system is pretty inclusive, pretty democratic, pretty fair, that's our objective, but which also creates spaces for each of us to go and find or create tailor-made solutions and centering on our particular identities, because we're all different. Because otherwise these individual aspirations never be satisfied. Because the link between creativity, talent, capacity for innovation are linked to unique dimensions in each of us, which have to do with the identity of a local culture. So there are many elements which establish distinctions and differences, and which we cannot, if you like, even out. It's impossible. Because some systems bring down the level, others are fairly even, and some attach great importance to top excellence. It's a very difficult question to answer. I thought about it a lot, and even so, we're talking of social issues, of cities, of families, of a collective approach. And I think the only way to find an answer to that conundrum is from a collective approach. It does involve or does demand a lot of generosity, a lot of social generosity, collective generosity. Thank you very much.
Última pregunta.
Thank you. From this question, from these last answers that you've given, a question has come to me. I hadn't already sent it to you, but I'm going to ask you it and just put it out there. I'd be grateful if you can answer it. It has to do with ethics. We've talked a lot about network, the digital sphere, and I'd like to ask a question, particularly picking up on Raphael's answer. We hear a lot about global ethics. Global ethics being defended, which could particularly regulate content as we vehiculate this huge digital world, regulate them across borders in this world where we all communicate, we all sell and buy, particularly because the network is everything. The most noble, the highest expression of art, literature that we've ever been able to create. But there's also the most destructive, the most toxic, the most base, and the most damaging for people and cities. It's all there. So a question has come to me. Really, no great thinkers in the 18th or 19th century had thought about this. How can we regulate, if we must regulate, this huge universe where we all are, right from the little child to the eldest among us, in which very often there's huge benefits, as we've seen, for learning and knowledge and interaction and trade. But there are also huge evils because of these toxic content, as I've said, that flies around the world on the net. So I know it's perhaps not so much to do with the fields you work in, but I think it's a very worthwhile question. Is it worthwhile, this kind of ethical regulation? Is it worthwhile? Should we do it? Who should control it? All of that. Would any of you like to answer that? Okay, well, I've been used to going first in the answer, so I'll take that up. It's very interesting food for thought. Obviously, there's no one-size-fits-all recipe. And it's something I have thought about personally, and to do with social innovation, which has to do with business models at business schools. And it's the difference between ethics and issues. We have to do something, but I think in the long term, where it can be most effective in terms of inclusive policies, because for me, inclusion is a value. It's about promoting social justice, and that's a universal value. And unlike ethics, values are within each of us. Values are different. Each person has different values. For example, a mum goes home and sees that the building is on fire. On one side of the building, there's 5 children. On the other is her own child. You might say 5 children are more worth saving than 1, but that's her child there. So she has that value of saving hers. And there's a challenge here when we talk about alliances and collectives, from governments, from schools, companies, any type of organization. And also from the individual level, developing spiritual intelligence, which is not the same as religion. I'm not talking about religion here, but spiritual intelligence as we develop these universal values on an individual and a collective level. It's a kind of parallel process, a global ethic or an ethical code. If we just think about it from the regulatory perspective, then there might also be parallel strategies to bypass it and to continue this vicious circle. Rafael, continuing the order of before. I've been lucky enough to work in various places around the world and to meet a lot of people at different levels, be it at government, people in remote cut-off areas, in the countryside. And I firmly believe that people are pretty much the same everywhere. They smile, they laugh, they enjoy. We love interacting with other people. And it's really just the context that we grow up in that makes us have our differences, really the religious or values or whatever else. Society and the history of humanity tells us that we continue to evolve, we continue to develop new ideas, new problems continue arising, and we address them and resolve them, things that are very long-term issues. Sometimes we feel the need to resolve things urgently, and they're very complex problems, and we won't be able to solve them immediately. So coming back to my field, which is the world of technologies, a few years ago, we found that new technologies in governments could help us to fight corruption. And this whole issue of transparency came up. It's well known in Spain nowadays, but we started to work with governments in South America 20-odd years ago, at a time when we were finding out how we could use new technologies in new ways to tackle corruption at the root, because rules were predefined and information was there, and it was possible to find it out. So we could. What we found was that people who were corrupt were thwarting projects, and in Microsoft, we didn't really dare at that time to say, well, these technologies will help you fight corruption. Now we do say that because it's been proven, really, that we can use these models of accountability and transparency based on new technologies. I think one of the key strengths that the new digital economy and the new platforms we have give us is this huge potential for transparency of information, which is out there. It can be seen. There will always be ways to know what's going on, who's doing what, and ways of recording it and registering. That has huge potential to create protection mechanisms. We don't necessarily know how at the moment. We're still learning and discovering, but it is definitely one of the strengths that these platforms afford. And I think obviously we will regulate things. That's what we always do when we don't find any other way to do things, but we'll probably then will deregulate afterwards when we've realized what it is that we need to do. So it's a process. It's changing. We're discovering new scenarios. There are new challenges facing society, science, and in this case technology, where we play a major role in this. But it all comes down to transparency, coexistence, and the basic rules of our human societies. Thank you. The issue of global ethics, and internet obviously has put that on the table as vital. It's a system that belongs to all. And global ethics is fundamental and extremely difficult. To my mind, ethics is created through education. Here, the role of education is decisive. That's how we build our ethics. And it depends on our life experiences. Last month, I was in Medellin, Rwanda, Sofia, Bucharest. I had and London. But London isn't a good example here. But for people like me, I live in Portugal, in Lisbon, and I've never lived through a war. I don't know what war is as such. I don't know what it's like to be hungry. I don't know what it's like to be a victim of a real huge issue. And so these places I've been to these situations were normal: corruption, war, dictatorship, hunger, and this marks generations to come for years. These people have a value of life. In a place like Angola, the true value in a place like Medellin also is different to ours. Their reality and these very structural issues are very different. And that means that their ethics are different to ours also. The way they see things is different. I think Raphael's points are very interesting because it's an accelerator. Internet doesn't just enable communication and everything we know about, but it also throws up something that we fear, which is transparency. Sometimes it's all very much more demanding. You have to look very closely at this information, but it also has this side of transparency. Things are different to what they were years ago, and that will have an impact on how we create new ethics in our new world, because many things that were done were because people didn't know how to do them any differently, and we weren't adapted to these new changes. Things have changed now, And I think we have to really focus on the positive aspects of the internet and communications, because they can decentralize power. Previously, you had politicians, business people, very concentrated in a very visible way still, and they were who was regulating the whole system. But the new digital era creates many possibilities for different types of power. That's going to be very fast, hugely fast, very challenging also. But it will also mean that systems will change radically. If we can't regulate this organic, this viral system ethically, then I don't really know. I don't know whether we'll ever be able to have a ethics of humanity. I don't know, but I know that we have to try to do this, and we are. This is our energy to move forward. It's going to be hard, though. Thank you very much, then. So, as I said earlier, I'm going to just highlight the main points. First, I'd like to thank the speakers for being very clear and to the point, which you have been. As you know, today's a long day. We don't have much time. So 3 highlights, I think, of the points that we've been talking about to make this link between creativity and inclusion, which was the main aim of today's first plenary session. Firstly, potential of the potential of the digital skills of all citizens. Governments, obviously companies, civil society organizations can all push forward digital skills among people to create more access, more education. And this access should be free of charge. And there are increasing amounts of information sources, universities that offer content free of charge. Second point, which I think is vital here to recall, in the last 200 years, there's been increasing democratization of knowledge. The great dream of the French thinkers has really come true in the second half of the 20th century, i.e., giving people access to knowledge. And it comes back to the famous encyclopedia that the French created at first to do that. So the new digital society has created huge potential for an information society to reduce illiteracy. Also, as we've already heard, illiteracy has been slashed in the last few years worldwide. And the third concept I wanted to highlight is the function of art, on the one hand, in freeing us from internal suffering or social difficulties, and on the other hand, as a mechanism or an instrument for cohesion and development for the whole culture of a city or a people. So stress the idea of art in all of its expressions: music, painting, literature, poetry. It has many expressions and manifestations, and it can be a way of harnessing individual talent, but also as a release from the suffering that people undergo. It can be then a mechanism for salvation and also for release. So anyway, those are the 3 main points I wanted to highlight, although there's much more, and I'd just like to wind up by thanking you all very much for coming. Thank you.